Hello, and welcome to another panel at the Games Accessibility Conference. My name is Chris, and I'm happy to be hosting and taking part in the Deaf and Hard of Hearing panel. Joining me today is Annie, Nikki, and Ben, who all have similar and shared experiences like me of being a deaf gamer. And we're here today to talk about basically the topic in all its glory. Um, I am a founder of ManyCats, a studio which is helping people with disability to get into the games industry, as well as somebody who advocates a lot for accessibility. So I'm excited to meet other people who are similar to me, which is very rare actually. So I'm very excited about today's panel. So Annie, why don't you introduce Annie? Would you please introduce yourself next?
Hi, yes, my name is Annie. I don't have a professional background in gaming. I just like to play games and happen to be deaf, so that's really my background. But it's just ironically, I really got into games as a kid because they were way more accessible to me than other forms of digital media. Back in the 90s, TV was not captioned. There were no DVDs that were captioned. VHS didn't come with captions in Germany where I'm from originally. So that's really why I started playing computer games and video games in general. But at the same time, as I got older, I realized that it's not always quite as accessible as it could be or should be for me either.
Oh, that's great. What about you, Nikki? Can you introduce yourself?
I certainly can. Yeah. Hi, I'm Nikki. I'm hard of hearing. I basically started to lose my hearing around 2000, 2001. And it was not because of any kind of medical reason or any kind of thing like that. It was purely because I went to too many loud concerts and ruined my hearing. And since then I've kind of like navigated the ocean, shall we say, of gaming and online communication and various things like that. I generally, on a day-to-day basis, kind of like am always for accessibility. I am a content creator and a streamer, and one of my favorite games is World of Warcraft, and I really, really love the accessibility settings that they have in that game, and would really love to see more games kind of go that way.
Oh, it's great to hear, Nikki. I think it's important that for people to realise that hard of hearing or deafness can happen at any point of your life. You know, it's not necessarily something that you could be born with. You know, it can affect anyone, and you know, it could affect anybody. So I'm glad you've sort of mentioned the reasons behind your hard of hearing status. Last but not least, it's Ben.
Hi, I'm Ben. I've been deaf since birth. I wear hearing aids. I've pretty much grown up in a hearing world. And in 2015, I pretty much started doing journalism in video games properly, started advocating for accessibility a little bit more, and it's just progressed now to the point that I'm just pretty much talking about accessibility every day. And that's what I do.
Yeah, not a bad thing to be talking accessibility.
Yeah.
That's great. As you can see, that you know we've all got different backgrounds. You know, all different reasons why we game as well, maybe. And that's really cool to hear. Really, you know, pun intended there. So I think we should just get straight into it and start discussing basically games and their accessibility for deaf people. So who feels brave enough to start the conversation? I'm looking at you, Nikki.
I thought you might be. I it's how do I say this? It's a bit of it's a bit of an interesting standpoint looking at it from somebody who isn't deaf and somebody who is hard of hearing. So obviously there are some things that I hear and there are some things that I don't hear. According to my audiologist, I have really struggled with really kind of like high pitch and really, really low pitch. So I hear a lot of the mids, but not a lot of the lows and the highs. So I generally really struggle in games like think an example, Assassin's Creed, where I have to have a lot like the new one, Valhalla, has got some really, really good things in the game for people who are deaf and hard of hearing. And they've got a lot of things like on-screen audio captions, and they've got things like things trying to think of a word, like shapes and stuff on the screen that basically tells you like which direction the sound is coming from and everything. Yeah. And that's so good to have, because a lot of things like footsteps and things like that, if I don't have the ability to turn up the volume of footsteps, it's nice to have that thing on screen to tell you that footsteps are behind you, footsteps are to the left, that kind of thing. And you know, and it's not until you lose your hearing. I mean, as I've already stated, you know, I've spent about half of my life at this point without full hearing capabilities, basically. And I basically have kind of had to adjust to not having this. And it's been a very, very kind of odd experience at times, because like I kind of think back to when I was a kid and when I would sit there in front of the TV and I would play things like Super Mario on my NES, and I would play it and I'd be quite happy. But then like you think about it now and you think of kids that are playing games like that, and you think, well, you know, the games was quite simple and the sound was quite simple. But if kids are going to get into more complex things like Fortnite, which is also another game which has really, really good accessibility settings. My son's massively into Fortnite, and my son is 7, and he's a massive, massive Fortnite fan. And I was looking at the accessibility settings on Fortnite last night, and I was absolutely blown away by the amount of accessibility settings in that game. And I was like, for a game that kind of has such a bad reputation at times, it's got some absolutely cracking accessibility settings.
Yeah, it's great that the sort of big, I guess the big players, you know, like Fortnite, you know, even like Ubisoft and, you know, Assassin's Creed franchise, you know, they're very up there when it comes to making sure things are accessible. And it's great to see that, you know, whether, you know, you are born hard of hearing or deaf, or will come later in life, that, you know, you're not going to lose, you know, a passion for gaming in that. You know, there's always going to be a chance to, you know, play the games that you love. Anybody want to further that point of, like, you know, sort of maybe the current games that they're playing at the moment and how they feel about them? What about you, Annie? What do you play at the moment?
Sorry, I wasn't sure who you were talking to. Yes, actually, I mean, I didn't mention when I lost my hearing earlier, but I lost it when I was about a year old, and Brittany keeps it is really important, and she is that we're all sort of deaf or hard of hearing, and very individual and also situational independent of what we hear, because I do wear hearing aids, I do hear some things, but one thing that I do not really have a grasp of is that people can hear which direction something comes from, or which direction sound comes from. So everything she mentioned, I agree, is a huge thing in terms of accessibility. And I have to say that things are improving, and it has been really interesting for me, actually, because I only got my first ever console, a PlayStation 4, a little while ago, like a year and a half ago or so. So I was really excited to jump into all these PlayStation exclusives that I have never played before. And if you just look at the evolution of the games released by Naughty Dog, which obviously sort of had this pinnacle in The Last of Us Part 2, which I haven't played yet, by the way, so no spoilers, please. But that was released last year, and it was hailed as one of those cornerstones of accessibility. Apparently it's really good, and I can't wait to play it. But I started at the beginning, so I started with Uncharted Drake's Fortune, which I think is from 2007, settle, I'd say.
Mm.
I would not say it's unplayable for me, but I have to play it on easy settings because I don't even know if I could or the enemies are in the area or someone is still there because I can't hear when they're shooting at me. I can't hear which directions they're shooting
Yeah.
from, so I only know that I'm being shot at when I start losing my health. And then if I was playing on a harder setting, it would already be too late at that point. So it's really, really, really important to have visual indicators for these kind of things, especially in these kind of games that are supposed to be immersive. It just helped me, I guess, that I have an easy setting that I can play on, but then at the same time, I think I would prefer to play on the harder setting and actually know when I have to fight back. And what I also want to say is that like a really, really big pet peeve of mine is that some games have just some sort of sound somewhere, and then they just assume that when you hear the sound, you're going to go there, and then you will be able to advance the story. So it's just like a really concrete example I can give you was that last year when the pandemic started, I really got into Kingdom Come Deliverance, which is a great game, but it's also not very accessible. There's so many issues with that game. But there was a quest where to advance, you just have to get to an area and you don't really know where you have to go, and that's great because that's amazing, right? But I couldn't find what I was supposed to do, and I googled online and read a guide, and it said, "Oh, go where you hear a dog barking." I had no idea where there was a dog barking. I ended up asking my boyfriend who was at home if he could help me with that. And then once you go to that area, a cutscene triggers, and then you progress with the game, right? So just things like this can happen in this day and age. You need to have some kind of option for that. You need to at least alert people of the fact there's a dog barking, and then ideally tell me which direction it comes from because I don't know. So yes, that's definitely a big thing. I think things have been getting better with subtitling of quick scenes and dialogue and so on. I'm quite happy with that. Just sometimes it could be a little bit more readable. If you really rely on it, it's great. If it can be big and can be a font that you can actually read.
Mm-hmm.
I think a big thing, still room and improvement for a lot of people, is sort of that the UI element of can I make this text bigger so I can actually read it?
Yeah.
A lot of games still, for some strange reason, struggle with that. Even though there's pretty much good examples and standards out there. You can use like the BBC's guidelines for subtitling because that's like 40-50 years of it, research and user experience. So it's like there's resources out there to get it right. So there's no excuses to get it wrong now.
No. I would also say as well that going back on kind of like a visual kind of thing as well. We're always very happy to have captioning in game, but it's rather sad how many game studios out there don't actually use captioning, and like they kind of like treat it as almost like a second forethought kind of thing. Like I've played games recently, and I've been actually kind of annoyed that there's been no captioning, and I'm like, well, I can't remember what game it was. And I remember having to take it back, and I was like, they were like, well, why do you want to refund the game? I was like, can't play it. And they're like, why can't you play it? I was like, there's no captioning in the game. I cannot understand what the people are saying in the game. They're talking too quick and I can't physically understand it. And the person behind the counter was blown away by the fact that I was returning a game because of accessibility settings.
That's crazy. Ben, what are you playing at the moment that sort of in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I've been playing quite a lot of shooting games at the moment, particularly Apex Legends, which is probably one of the most accessible battle royales that I've played, simply because it lets you use the ping system and it has subtitles for everything that happens in the game. So I'm never at a loss on what is happening. And I'm finding that more and more games are adapting accessibility features, and I'm able to play more. And it's reached at the point now where the industry seems to be, on the one hand, there are studios that, as Nikki said, that they don't do anything. There's the studios that are implementing more accessibility features, and then there are studios that are trying their hardest to innovate and add different features, like Naughty Dog and Ubisoft. And then the ones that are just adding accessibility features are ensuring that more games are accessible for more people, which is brilliant. And hopefully they'll start catching up with the likes of the big players in the accessibility scene. But I've been pretty much enjoying just Sea of Thieves. I was playing that last night. Still can't really get over the voice communications when other players start shouting at you and then they board you and take all your loot. But the stuff that's like on the screen is understandable, it's readable, presented big enough for me to understand everything, and just starting to feel a little bit more comfortable in playing games in general at the moment.
I kind of wanted to ask everybody about, I guess there's a lot more games now that are being remastered or sort of rejigged for the like new generation consoles and that. Obviously, that means a lot of past games where they have less accessibility or not as great subtitling or just audio cues now are being brought up into this new generation. Do you hope that studios then implement new changes to improve that, or are you worried that they're just basically just going to rehash it to improve graphics and that rather than actually improving how people can play it?
One example that I can bring up is that one of my favorite games from the last 10 years, let's say, maybe even 20, was Assassin's Creed 3. When it was originally released, it didn't have much of the way of accessibility settings at all, because back then studios generally weren't looking at accessibility from a point of like a user point at all. And when the game was remastered and brought out in 2019, I think it was, it then had subtitles all of a sudden, and it was great. And I was like, well, I love this game anyway. And now I love it even more. Now they've kind of brought it up to date and they've put accessibility settings in it. I mean, they hadn't gone the whole kind of hog that Ubisoft do nowadays with the whole visual cues and things in things like Valhalla, and I think Watch Dogs has it now as well with their visual cues. I've not played Watch Dogs, so I don't know. But it was nice to kind of see that they're giving it some kind of thought to put the captioning in, if nothing else.
I think the example that screams out to me, is maybe when they remastered Spyro and they completely left out subtitling.
Yeah.
Oh no.
So they, people can get it wrong as well. Like rather than adding things to it, things are just getting lost in translation essentially.
I was going to bring up Spyro as an example because I've got two examples of that. The one is Spyro, which is, Activision said that there's no industry standard for subtitles, therefore I don't really need to implement subtitles. And everyone was just like, no, just put the subtitles in. So eventually they put the subtitles in, so that was brilliant. But there was another game, Oddworld Stranger's Wrath, which came out back in the early 2000s. And the subtitles back then, it had subtitles, and they were kind of decent. And then when they remastered it for the Switch, they didn't. They changed the whole interface, so they didn't have subtitles. And I was reviewing it at the time, so I spoke with the people, the PR contact, and apparently they went back through and they changed stuff, and in a future update they brought everything back up again. So I think it's just a case of studios just forgetting about accessibility almost. It's just like, let's remaster this game, let's make it look good, and then they just forget that, the subtitles, and they need to make the hard maps. And I think it's just that forgettable stuff, really.
Yeah. Do you play a lot of old games, Annie?
I mean, I don't really say I'm a super retro gamer. I play lots of new games, and it's just because I got the PlayStation that I just jumped on that opportunity to start playing the exclusive from the beginning. I really enjoy it, but it's also amazing to see how some studios really have gone on a journey to improve this. But I think with the remastered, it's sometimes such a wasted opportunity as well. One of the biggest disappointments for me, I think, was that I've always really been curious or interested in the Resident Evil games. So when they were remastered, I got really excited because I knew that the originals were not accessible. I have to say I never tried to play it because there were just some aspects that I just read about that I knew it would not be playable for me. It would be really difficult. And then they remastered them, and I started reading the accessibility review. It's so amazing that we have websites now, like Can I Play That and so on, where I can actually go on there fast and make an informed decision on whether I can buy a game or not. It's a really, really good thing to have. So with these wild creatures, it don't happen so often anymore. But based on the reviews of the remasters, I decided that I still can play them, and I'm just thinking why. I mean, this is such a big series of games as well. And horror or this whole element, it doesn't have to be all about audio. I don't really know anything else. I can still be immersed without having that audio aspect, and that might be different for people who are hearing or who grew up hearing. But for me, horror isn't about the sound. It's about a lot of other things, about the visuals, about the feeling, about the atmosphere, and it's absolutely possible to translate that. So it's very sad that especially horror games don't always take that opportunity.
No, I agree with those points, definitely. I think there's still work there, to get the developers thinking a lot better in terms of that sort of genre. I know Ben touched upon it a little bit when what he was saying, but I just want to discuss maybe about like online communication. So when we actually do play online with others, or in multiplayer games, like how we all find that sort of experience of having to use mics and comms and that to actually join in essentially.
Yeah, I think I've been having I've recently reviewed the new Xbox wireless headset, which is supposed to give crystal clear audio. Turns out the crystal clear audio is just for you to sound good to other players. And I find a lot of the problem with online games, for me at least, is if I'm using a third-party application like Discord, I can bump my volume of individual people up to 200%, which is brilliant for me because I can just amplify my friends and I can hear them better. Plus, I understand their voice better than I do with a stranger's voice. But when it comes to strangers online, no one ever seems to have their microphone set up correctly. And I think a lot of that comes down to console manufacturers not allowing people to test their stuff before, because most people just, plug and play. And I think there needs to be some sort of a way that people can monitor themselves so that they're not sounding like a distorted, horrible mess, like a microphone down their throat or something. It is irritating because I tend to sit there on like a game like Apex Legends and I've got a teammate barking orders at me and I don't know what they're telling me to do. So I ignore them, and the only thing that I can make out is them swearing at me because I'm not doing what they're telling. I'm just like, sorry, okay. So it's I think a lot of the problem is down to not being able to test these equipments.
Annie, do you play much with other people online in terms of when you have to communicate with them?
Yes, I mean, it's probably important to remember everybody's experiences at their phone. I'm not wearing headphones because there's no way I can communicate on audio alone. I just can't. I don't hear enough with that, even with hearing aids. So I need lip reading or captions or something like that, which is obviously really difficult in games. And I think I do like to play online games, especially during the pandemic. I think it's a great way to stay in touch with people. And also, during the pandemic, I have actually gone from living with my boyfriend for years to being in a long distance relationship in different countries. So we like to play games together as well. But it's can sometimes be really difficult. And for me, I think there are two issues with online games. The first one is actually that you play competitively with others against others, and you're at a disadvantage because they can hear you, but I'm going to hear them. I'm not necessarily going to know they are there, and if they are trying to harm you in the game, then that's a bit of an issue. And the other issue is also that with a lot of games, if you want to get better or if you want to do the in-game content, even if the game doesn't have in-game voice communications, it will still be assumed that you can use them. So, just some examples, it's World of Warcraft, the raiding. I'm sure Nikki can tell a bit more about that. It's got end-game content, and I also, unfortunately for me, happened to really get into Dead by Daylight last year, which is not good for those people to play because it had all of those elements. It's an asymmetrical multiplayer where you have a team of 4 versus 1, right? And also the team of 4, there's no in-game communication, but when you play with friends, normally you will go on Discord and you will communicate with each other. Or GTA Online, when you do missions or heists, you will communicate with other people to coordinate, and I just can't have that aspect. So at all, because even with friends, it didn't work. So it would be really nice to see more alternatives to that. And I know that voice to text isn't always there yet, and it would also only be there if it's already within the game, not with those games where it sort of just implies that you hop on Discord and talk while you play the game. I think I'm really curious about the team system. I've never played Apex Legends, but I feel like that might be a solution for me for games like Dead by Daylight or GTA Online, or maybe with even within World of Warcraft, to have something like that, just so that you have a basic communication of being able to let your team that you play with know what you're on, where you are, because they can't necessarily always see you on their screen, and it's just really important. And it's also a beautiful aspect of gaming, especially during a time where we can't necessarily hang out with our friends in person. And I would really like to see more done there.
What about you, Nikki? Do you tend to communicate with people online when you're playing?
I do, but I only do it on PC because I have various setups on my own personal PC that enable me to basically do this. I'm both a PC and an Xbox gamer, but I generally don't communicate online with Xbox for very many of the same reasons that Ben talks about. You either get people shouting at you, and then it's too intense in your ears and you just want to take your headset off and just completely ignore them, or 2, they're swearing at you and you're like, well, what the hell have I done now? I don't get this. So I generally don't communicate on Xbox at all. I'm playing something like, say, Overwatch or something along those lines on Xbox, then I generally group up with friends and then we'll use Discord. For people that don't know, Discord's available on a phone, so you can basically kind of like plug your headset like into your phone and kind of like use Discord that way. That's always a nice way to do it, because many console setups like Xbox and PlayStation and things like that, I know they try really hard with the in-game communication, but there's so many things lacking in it that could be just brought up to the standards of things like Discord. So things like on my PC, I have, as I said, I do use Discord on my PC. I play a lot of World of Warcraft. In fact, actually, I was playing last night. And I generally don't group up again with people who are not friends and people that I don't know. One of the good things that Discord does is that when people are talking, it'll kind of like light up the name so you can kind of get an idea of which person is talking, and that's really, really helpful if you don't know a person's voice that well. The general thing that I struggle with is accents. So playing a game like World of Warcraft, you are subjected to so many different accents. I mean, like heavy Eastern European accents or German accents or somebody who's from Russia. And it's hard to understand if you are very, very poor at understanding people's accents, especially if because you haven't got their faces and you can't lip read, and you've got no captions, you have half the time you don't know what they're saying. And Annie's mentioned this before about things to do with lack of captioning and lack of understanding things like online communication. And it's just generally, if you are deaf, it's a bit of a minefield.
Oh, definitely. Like, I definitely share that. Go ahead, Ellie.
Yeah, I actually had an idea because you were talking about Discord overlays, right? Maybe what if there was something that wasn't tied to a game, but was tied to a software like Discord, where you could create your own short messaging and ping system that pops up as an overlay. So before as a group, you could go in and you could just whatever game you're playing, you could say like a short message like "I'm behind you," and you type that in, and then you can select it as a button. You can just press in the game, or for Dead by Daylight, it could be something like "I'm on a generator." This game and makes sense, but so that you should sort of have these pre-defined messages, so that you're not actually typing out in the game, but you just click it, and that could be like an overlay that you could customize.
Yeah.
But I know that it would create issues that maybe some people would say it's cheating or something like that, but I don't know how it is because it's still less information than you would get when you're actually talking to someone, right?
Yeah, but I would counter argue that I don't think forms of accessibility are cheating. There's a massive communication problem between very many people in the gaming community, and they seem to think that accessibility settings in a game are cheating. And I think this is a really, really unfair way of looking at things.
Yeah, definitely. Without it's in my eyes, it's kind of one of those things of well, aren't they cheating then if we don't get the accessibility option? Aren't they got the advantage then? Are they not cheating because they got all the props to do it well, while we're kind of got these barriers up that we have to overcome before we can actually get playing? Like, yeah, shut my fist in anger at people that say that.
Yeah, it's the whole thing about gatekeeping gaming. Like, people with accessibility problems and people with disabilities shouldn't be allowed to play games because they're not the same as me. And it's just like, well, no, gaming's for everybody.
Yeah, do you?
Yeah, but there's always the argument that hearing people would use it too, and they would get that with the information. I've heard that.
Do you think there's a sort of a current culture around attitudes towards people with disabilities, like hard of hearing, deaf? Do you think like the communities, for example, gaming communities, quite negative, or are they positive? Are they, or it's a kind of a mixture of both at the moment?
It's almost kind of like a dependent on which circles you kind of hang out in. Like, a lot of the people that I surround myself with generally are very positive for the idea of accessibility in gaming, and are very kind of, yes, gaming is for everybody, and everybody should be allowed to play games, no matter what your age or your ability status. But you always get those random people who hide out in dark, shadowy corners that basically shout from the top of their lungs and stand on their little soapbox and go, actually, no, I've decided that this game is not for this person. And, and it's just like, no, it shouldn't happen. It exists. So you can't deny that it doesn't exist, because you'd be a fool to. But we all want to live in the same kind of world. We all want to play the same games. So why can't we all have the same kind of settings?
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I think that what Nikki said, it really depends who you surround yourself with. I kind of try to stick to myself and the people I know when I play games online. And there's a community that I'm part of, they're all hearing, and they really do try. But then if you go beyond that, it can be extremely difficult. And what I also found a bit annoying or just frustrating is also that a lot of gaming content that's created online is also not particularly accessible. If you go on Twitch and just look for these streams that are currently online that have closed captions, there are not many of them. And YouTube guides or tutorials, which I sometimes have to look up because I'm stuck in a game because I didn't hear it. I have to go. They are badly captioned, and then I don't understand the place name, and the captions didn't pick up the place name. So I think that I'm a bit sometimes deluded because that small group I'm a part of, they try, but then even they sometimes, because of the lack of options, because there is no alternative to using Discord or voice chat, for example. I mean, what am I going to do at the moment? There is nothing else we can do, or I can do, right? But I think outside of that, I'm a little bit scared to actually venture outside and play with strangers. So I'm really impressed that you actually play with people that you don't know anything.
Yeah, Ben, as a journalist, obviously you have to have your sort of eye on, I guess communities, as a whole, as well as sort of developers and what's going on. You need to sort of have the vibe of the player to see what people are interested in. So, what do you get the sense of from, I guess that aspect of people? Attitudes?
Yeah, I am one of those idiots that checks the comments of everything. I read the comments, I see what people are saying, and it is awful. The way that some people, gatekeep games. The most controversial opinion seems to come down to the difficulty in the assist modes. I don't want to get too much into that because it's a whole minefield out there. But essentially, the way I think it should be seen is people who say a game should be played at this level. This is what the developers want people to play. Okay, so everybody can play. Every able person can play that game and they can reach that level by working great. But for disabled people, we're down here. If an assist mode or difficulty options, any features can help us reach what that level is meant to be played at our level, then I don't see a problem with that. I think that makes sense. So, we can have things that can help us play a game in the same way that everybody else can play it. And that's what I think is important. And everybody who's gatekeeping, the whole creative and artistic vision of the developers and such, it's just a really bad attitude to have. And I think the more we talk about accessibility and the more developers implement accessibility, then the louder that noise is, rather than all of the people with 0 followers on Twitter who are just looking to start rubbish online.
Yeah, I like that, definitely. And it's great that that's why we're all here to talk more about accessibility and our experiences. Yeah. So it does become louder, and a better community will come out of it. I do want to ask about everybody's experience in terms of actually in-game, in person even, sort of events, because obviously, hopefully now that with vaccinations and lockdowns lifting, fingers crossed, that gaming events will be a thing that's coming back again, and we'll all be able to meet up and talk about games together. But how have you found your experiences of such events, or just events in general, pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID as well?
I would say that I'm kind of a rarity when it comes to people in my community, because I always take my partner with me, always. And it's not because I need some kind of bodyguard or I need to fight off the trolls or anything along those lines. It's purely because they're so loud and I generally can't hear a lot of the things going on because, you go round and booths are playing loud music. People have got, there's some rando standing on a stage with a microphone going, rah, 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 and you're like, oh my God, I can't hear. And so I always take him because I'm like, your hearing is absolutely fine. If there is something that I can't hear, or, somebody goes, hey, Nikki, I need to talk to you, and I don't hear them, he can literally be like, hey, this person over here wants to talk to you. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool, that's cool. But one of the other reasons that I always take him with me is purely because, and I think I mentioned this to you guys in the past, is that as a person who generally has non-hearing problems, you don't realize how physically and mentally exhausting it is to go to one of these things. Because, like, you know, you walk around and your legs are tired and you're like, okay, physically tired, but you get mentally tired from these things because not only are you processing the amount of visual stimuli that's going on, but you're also trying to concentrate on focusing on hearing things. So, like, your brain is constantly working overtime because you're thinking, did I hear that correctly? Did I hear that person correctly? What is that sound? And you are constantly trying to almost like push your brain to the limits of your hearing capability to understand what's going on in the day. And if you don't have hearing problems, you don't understand this.
I think I am in my personal, like, when I go and there's just so much going on, so much chatter and background noise, and it's just noise, isn't it? It's not, and I always tend to just take out my hearing aid so I can just get rid of like a layer of noise, even though it reduces my chances of maybe hearing clearly. You know, it's just I have to, because it gets too much, and you know. It's better to, I guess, be more deaf than to be bombarded with just white trash noise.
I've had a few events such as Eurogamers, EGX and EGX Rest, and I've tried to do interviews with people, and unfortunately they do these interviews out on the show floor in the middle of all of this noise. And luckily I've got a microphone, so I just let them talk into the microphone, but they're talking to me and I'm just smiling and nodding. Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. And then I just hope that later on I can get someone to do a transcription at it, in case I can't hear anything that's on the recording, because there's still that noise in there. But it's just, like Nikki was saying, it's just so much noise, and it just gets to the point that your ears are so fatigued by everything. At the end, you just go home and it's like, finally.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of an issue sometimes just because how the event venues are. Like, for example, in our Cologne State Fair, which is nearby to where I am right now, it's just these massive halls, and it's great because they're a blank canvas for any exhibition that wants to go there. But they then just pop booths in there, like the different stores, and then a stage sometimes in the middle of the venue, or sometimes on one side. But there's other night of people actually interacting with the people managing the stores, people are shuffling about, getting up, and so on. And I have seen it before, so this isn't a gaming event, but I have been to an event where I was lucky enough to be part of having a more exclusive pass. So I got to go to a couple of talks that were in this little extra room that was built into the big room, right? And that was already so much better because it was just the rewards for the sound wasn't disappearing like that. And I was also wondering whether that would not just be a solution for us that could help a bit. But when I go, and I normally don't go by myself either, like Nikki, I took someone to here with me. And they are really tired at the end of the day too. Maybe it's not quite as bad for them as us, but I think at events like that, when it's that loud, even hearing people kind of get a glimpse of what that kind of fatigue means, because they are normally knackered at the end of the day too. And maybe if you just had try to soundproof stages more, that would already be a massive big step. And then for me, the other issue is that I have to sit in the first row, so I can also try and lip read whoever is speaking, and that can be really difficult because you have to be there ages before. And I also feel really awkward asking someone to get up. You know what I mean? So I was actually thinking, I was wondering if there could also be something like disabled seats or something like that for people who need to be at the front in order to be able to kind of understand what is going on. And I think it would make it easier to ask for this if this is something that is offered, rather than me just emailing the organizer beforehand and just saying, oh, I need this, because it makes me feel awkward as well. So asking for accessibility is not always easy either.
Yeah. Just a kind of like a side point type thing, something that Ben said about EGX. Once upon a time, I did video game journalism. This was back in 2012 or 2011, one of the two. This is back when it used to still be called Eurogamer. And I basically had the option to do some interviews with a couple of game studios. And the press area at the time was very much away from everything, and they kind of had like a little separate section, and it was quite nice because like we could actually sit down with the journalists and the people from the studios and ask them questions, and I didn't feel like my hearing was being kind of like bombarded by anything. Like there was still noise kind of like in the background type thing, but it wasn't really super loud, and it kind of makes me feel sad that it sounds like EGX is kind of like regressed on that kind of thing, because it would be much better for them to kind of like, you know, kind of like have the press section kind of shifted away to the side again.
Yeah, like I think last time I went to EGX, I think there was sort of like breakout rooms. Then it just depends. I think what venue they're in, and sort of how they utilize the space. But you know, it's advice to anybody who might be listening who does events to make sure there is that, you know, separate room, side room, you know, that's quieter, that people can escape to, and you know, whether that's to do their job or, you know, to have a bit of a break, or actually just to, you know, chat to people that they, you know, they wanted to in a, you know, a quiet way.
Yeah,
definitely.
I mean, I was going to say, I must obviously point out here that this was back at Earl's Court as well, and obviously Earl's Court doesn't exist anymore. So,
yeah. Unfortunately, I think we're pretty much running out of time now. But we've talked about so much that I think people who are watching will find so useful, and it can take a lot away from. So I believe that there'll be a Discord that the panelists will be a part of. If you have any more questions that might come from this panel, that I'm sure we'll all be happy to answer. So I'd like to say thank you to everybody who's taken part. I really appreciate everybody coming together today to talk about your experiences. And yeah, hopefully we'll see more from all of you to do with accessibility or just to gaming in general. So everybody wave and say goodbye.
bye.
Bye.
Bye.